a tier list for all the items from the Risk of Rain 2 Alloyed Collective DLC. There's a lot of people who have problems with tier lists because this game has a lot of randomness involved and everything's situational. I'm going to say that several times with several of the items on this list. But this is the best and most fun way I have of going into detail on most of the items and explaining a lot of its interactions. So here's the tier list ranking the items from worst to best. Starting out with the worst item in the DLC, it's gotta go to the Neutronium Weight. The new Lunar with the Alloyed Collective DLC, which is bordering on an F tier for me, just because of how buggy this thing is to use. I think the first time that I picked it up when I was playing the DLC on release, the item just straight up disappeared from my inventory and I think went to one of my drones. No clue, never got it back. Its effect is reduce your stats in combat but send this item to an enemy on hit. On death, this item will be sent to its holder's killer. Reduces damage by 30%, attack speed by 30%, movement speed by 30%, and armor by 35%. It's the lunar item Hot Potato. If it worked or was easier to manipulate, this item would be a lot better, but every time I've used it, it's almost never functioned the way I've wanted it to. It's D tier for depends on if it works. Next, we have Box of Dynamite. Now, this is a C tier item for me personally. I know in Alloyed Collective, they did increase the drone AI, making drones quite a formidable powerhouse, so much so they even had to nerf spare drone parts. However, dropping a box of dynamite every now and then, even from all of your drones, is not the most powerful effect, and you can't really control it all yourself. And I might even be underrating it because it's very hard to tell whether or not it's working. But compared to other items on this list, it just isn't as impressive. C tier. Now let's talk about Kinetic Dampener. This is one item that, unlike a lot of others on this list, isn't as situational. It's just a good item overall. Kinetic Dampener increases armor by 30 plus 30 per stack while you have a shield. When shield breaks, release a stunning pulse for 100% damage plus an amount equal to 100% plus 10% stack of your max shield. Grants a shield for 4% of your max health. 30 armor is not a little amount of armor. 30 armor is actually 23% damage reduction. It's essentially the same amount as a Rose Buckler, but only when you have shield up. That said, Rose Buckler only activates while sprinting, so depending on what survivor you are, Kinetic Dampener might be less situational. Now, as someone who personally hates PSG and Plasma Shrimp, you'll be surprised to hear that this is one of my favorite items because this makes shield a lot better. It gives you armor, so you have even more survivability when you have shield, and if you're a ranged survivor, this might be one of the only forms of armor that you're going to have in the game. Oddly Shaped Opal does give you 100 armor per stack, but Oddly Shaped Opal is a whole other DLC, and you only get the armor bonus one time. Honestly, I'll go ahead and say the Kinetic Dampener is probably a B tier item, which is pretty high considering how much I dislike shields. If you're an Eclipse player, Kinetic Dampener is definitely going to be something that increases your survivability tremendously, and if you pick up a single Transcendence, you have a permanent 30 armor per stack of Kinetic Dampener. Just 4 Kinetic Dampeners and you're over 50% damage reduction. Next, we have Eclipse Light. Whenever a skill comes off cooldown, gain a temporary barrier for 1% plus 0.25% per stack of your maximum health per second of the skill's base cooldown. Now, I'm putting the item here because any higher, I'd probably be called crazy, and any lower, I couldn't, say that based off of how situationally good this item can be. Because of the nature of the item where it is only affected by your base cooldown, items like Purity or Light Flux Pauldron, or even Bandolier, Hardlight Afterburner, Alien Head, anything that gets your ability off cooldown, let's not even talk about Brain Stalks, makes Eclipse Light even better. In the example of Bandolier / Brain Stalks, because these cause your abilities to immediately come off cooldown, does not matter how long that cooldown is, it means grabbing the longest cooldown ability you can find. I'm pretty sure it's Captain's Diablo Strike, but I can't be certain off the top of my head, which means you would get 40% of your maximum health as barrier within 0.5 seconds or whatever the global skill cooldown is, which is the fastest healing in the game off of one stack of a white item. Obviously, other certain conditions have to be met, like for example, having a Bandolier, having a Brain Stalks, or something like that, but it's not uncommon to find a Brain Stalks in your run, and it certainly isn't uncommon to find a common item in your run. You only need like one stack of each, and all of a sudden you're healing more than every other item combo of the game, basically. I hesitate to put this in B tier, but you know what? I think I am going to put it in B tier, but don't sleep on this item at all. It's really good. Faraday Spur. Another one of my favorite items from the DLC. Moving around builds up charge, granting up to 160% movement speed and 200% jump height at 100%. At 25% charge or higher, jumping triggers an explosive discharge for 400% plus 280% per stack damage in a 5 meter to 32.3 meter plus 7.5 meter per stack area. Personally, Faraday Spur is a high B tier for me. A lot of people get annoyed at the explosive discharge, but that's what a bidet's for. Any item that gives me 160% move speed with only one stack of it and 200% jump height is a friend of mine. This single item has helped me pillar skip so many different times since the DLC came out that honestly, I'm about to build a shrine to Faraday. Unbind your space spacebar if you have to, but this is a B tier for sure. At this point in the tier list, it's going to be a lot harder to decipher whether or not one item is better than the other, because a lot of these items are super cracked from here on out. I think here is where I'm going to put Hiker's Boots. Striking enemies from a higher elevation grants 1% plus 1% per stack critical strike chance and critical strike damage up to 10 times, last 10 seconds. While technically a situational item, and somewhat less useful than Lensmaker's glasses if you're not, elevated. Sorry, Short Kings, this might not be the item for you. But the only other item in the game that increases your critical strike damage is a red item from the Survivors of the Void DLC called Laser Scope. And that item doesn't even provide you any crit, not even the hidden 5% most other crit items give you. Plus, if you're playing Railgunner from Survivors of the Void once more, it gives you 2% damage per stack of the buff, just because of how that Survivor's passive works. I know some people, when it first came out, thought that Hiker's Boots weren't going to be that good. Trust me, they're very strong. It's just one of those things you don't really notice as much, especially if you're 5'2". But I'm going to definitely put Hiker's Boots on A tier for a majority of the cast in Risk of Rain 2. Substandard Duplicator. Picking up an item gives you a temporary copy of itself. Temporary items last an additional 10 plus 10 per stack seconds. Honestly, once again, this item is really good, and it's weird to put it so low on the list, especially since it's legendary. It is, however, very situational. For a lot of survivors, this item isn't going to be that good, and even on Drifter, who this item is really good on, if you pick up Tinker instead of Salvage, Substandard Duplicator becomes, well, substandard. However, if you checked out my Drifter guide, and you can see the kind of shenanigans you can get up to with Substandard Duplicator, it helps temporary items become a bit more powerful. Temporary item machines that you see out there typically have 5 items in them. Well, with Substandard Duplicator, you get 10, so they last twice as long. Actually more, because you get an additional 10 seconds per stack, but you get the point. With junk drones existing and being one of the best drones in the game, almost anybody can use a Substandard Duplicator, but it's definitely going to be better on certain survivors like Drifter. So for now, it's just A tier. Now we have Collector's Compulsion. Picking up an item or other collectible increases all stats by plus 3% for 20 seconds, up to 3 plus 2 per stack times. Barrels grant minor pickups. Whoa there, Dr. Disrespect. Calm down. This item is actually pretty cracked. If anyone remembers Growth Nectar from the previous DLC, Seekers of the Storm, and how busted that was when it got reworked, you might understandably see how the Collector's Compulsion could be quite as busted. For starters, what actually counts as a collectible? Items, temporary items, equipment, lunar coins, elusive antlers, orbs, bandolier packs, Drifter's junk, pause, monster teeth, Rex's harvest fruits, chef's kebab, passive, cleanup drone stuff, Gore's tome stuff, and a bunch of other random things. On Drifter, this item is amazing because, well, you can use salvage to spawn a bunch of temporary items and just immediately get all of your stat bonuses. However, if you have Seekers of the Storm DLC and elusive antlers, every elusive antler orb counts towards the stat pickup, and the way that Collector's Compulsion works is every time you pick up a new item or collectible, it refreshes the timer on all of them, much like elusive antlers. So as long as you pick up one collectible / item every 20 seconds, you'll always have the stat up. And wouldn't you know it, elusive antlers orb spawning is 12 seconds at 1 stack. So this item is good on everybody as long as you have something like that. I mean, at just 1 stack, it's a free 9% stats to all stats. Growth Nectar, a legendary, is 16% per stack and is way more situational. Also, even though Substandard Duplicator won't give you double stacks if you pick up an item with it, it does, however, give you an extra Collector's Compulsion every time you pick one up, which means even just picking up one Collector's Compulsion with Substandard Duplicator, you can have up to 15% stats, which can be pretty powerful. On Drifter, this item can be absolutely busted. Take a look at my Drifter guide and look towards the end when I'm talking about why Drifter is absolutely busted as a survivor. But I feel like this item can do work on just about everybody. Maybe I'm overestimating it, I don't know, but I'm definitely putting it in high A tier right now. Starting out our S tier is one of the new boss items, Functional Coupler. Hold 1 additional equipment, plus 1 per stack. Press the interact and equipment buttons to cycle through held equipment. Have you ever had to choose between a recycler or a credit card? I have, multiple times. And with this item, you don't have to anymore. It's beautiful, it's amazing, and unlike the Starstorm 2 mod item that does functionally the same thing, this one works much better. It allows for a lot of build diversity, and if you have a pillar skip but you don't want to get rid of it, even though you want a fun item like disposable missile launcher to come with you, with this item you truly can do both. Porque no los dos. That's an S tier for Spanish. Oh, and speaking of equipment, let's look at the Deus Machina. Briefly enter a countering stance that lets you parry any and all damage. A successful parry nullifies incoming damage, reduces your equipment cooldown by 75%, and grants Blessing, causing your next attack to always activate your on-hit effects. I shouldn't have to tell you, this item is pretty crazy. And it's not an item, it's an equipment. Starting off with the fact that you can use this to parry fall damage, parry void cradles, parry attacks from enemies, I guess, too, blood shrines, etc. The list goes on. They mean any and all. Actually, you know what? I haven't tried parrying the lethal damage from Warped Echo. item. But the second portion of the equipment, causing your next attack to always activate your on-hit effects, is pretty crazy. This means you can parry and save up your attack for your next huge big attack. Loader, Artificer, Railgunner, False Sun, survivors with massive damage attacks. Oh, I guess Captain with his nuke too. But long cooldowns are going to be absolutely blessed by this item, pun intended. Goated item, S tier. Now for an interesting one, Network Suffering. IT people know what I'm talking about. Infect up to 4 +2 per stack enemies with a computer virus that duplicates 50% of all damage taken and sends it to a global damage pool. Every 3 seconds, all infected enemies suffer 100% pooled damage. Think of this as one of the ultimate AoE items of the game. All infected enemies will take 50% of whatever damage you did to those infected enemies. So in layman's terms, let's say you did 100 damage to an infected enemy, 50 of that damage is being sent up into the infected pool, and now all 4 of the enemies, including the one you just hit for that 100 damage, will take that 50 damage. Now let's say somehow you did 100 damage to all 4 of those enemies. Now you're sending 200 damage up, and every single one of those enemies is going to take that 200 damage that you sent to the pool. On top of that, Network Suffering doesn't have a range to it, so you could be doing to an enemy literally across the map. That's the ultimate in AoE. Call that shit owie. This item can also be very strong against certain enemies, like for example the Soulless Wing, and it counts towards a death mark debuff. The only somewhat downside to this item, even though it's not really a downside as much as just a feature, once you reach the cap of infected enemies, you can't infect any other enemy. So you're gonna have to kill those enemies that you infected before you spread it to other enemies. Capiche? Okay. S tier item, Network Suffering, is amazing. Faulty Conductor, another boss item that you can get from the Alloy Hunter. Every 15, -20% per stack seconds, release a wave of electricity that energizes nearby allies for 7 seconds. Energized allies gain 30% attack speed and movement speed, and always land critical strikes with electric items and attacks. Once again, do I really have to describe why this item is so good? Every 15 seconds, you get 7 seconds of 30% attack speed and movement speed, and that's not even mentioning the fact that this will affect your drones and allies, and it makes it so every single electrical item / attack will always crit. Always. So that means Polyloot, Charge Perforator, Ukulele, Unstable Tesla Coil, Electric Boomerang, Luminous Shot, Royal Capacitor, the Overloading Elite Aspect, Artificer's Plasma Bolt, and Charged Nanobomb, also Ion Surge, Loader Thunder Gauntlet, funnily enough Captain's Power Taser, might finally be lethal, and False Sun's Meridian's Will, and Lunar Stakes, the little Thunder Strike it puts down. Needless to say, if you get this item, it is a huge damage boost. The only downside to the Faulty Conductor is that the only way to get it from a non-3D printer is to fight the boss in Conduit Canyon, which is apparently only able to be accessed once per run. So bringing a Trophy Hunter Tricorn is probably the only way you're really going to be able to see this item. But it is cracked when you get it. One of those items that once you get it, you're like, okay, this run is pretty much set. So definitely S tier for set. And finally, for the S tier, it should come as no surprise, the Orphaned Core. You think I'm going to be putting this guy anywhere but the top? Gain a friendly Soulless unit that launches itself at enemies for 400% plus 400% per stack damage. The unit inherits your movement speed items and deals more damage the faster it moves. The unit can be pet to cleanse negative effects. Recharges after 15 seconds. Once again, you're insane if you think I'm not going to be putting something that you can pet at the S tier, man. It spawns Best Buddy, which is a soulless validator, because it validates all of your feelings and loves you unconditionally. He also works as a mobile blast shower, which also means he can reset the cooldowns on Kajaros and Renalds and Void Bands if you're insane enough to pick those up. On top of that, Mithrix won't steal your Best Buddy. Whether that's because your Best Buddy truly is your Best Buddy, or Mithrix is just incapable of having friends, I'll leave that up for the philosophers to decide. But there's some other quirks for Best Buddy as well. Petting also activates squids and fireworks. And yes, Best Buddy can inherit Little Disciple, making Little Disciple, again, one of my favorite items in the game. Faraday Spur is also pretty funny to have on Best Buddy because it makes him fast and jump high. Here's a list of items that Little Buddy can inherit, and he will not inherit any negative movement speed items. So Stoneflux Pauldron, for example, will not be a deterrent for your Best Buddy. He doesn't gain any sympathy weight. And that's the tier list for all of the items in the DLC, except for, you might have noticed, meal items. I did that intentionally because, number one, I didn't want to spoil some of the items for you. And number two, you can really only get these like once a run. Technically, I think you get the computational exchange a couple times a run if you go through the Siren's Call route or something like that. But for the most part, you're probably only going to run into these items like once. And unlike Faulty Conductor, which technically speaking, you can only get once, you can still get that from a 3D printer. I have. Meal items, for the most part, are restricted to the computational exchange. So if you don't want to be spoiled and don't want to see me rank those, I'd recommend getting out now because I'm about to. Starting out with Quick Fix, increases bonus health and regeneration gains by 50%, plus 15% per stack, does not affect bonuses from leveling up. Honestly, A tier item immediately. False Sun, loves this item, and I'm going to assume does not affect bonuses from leveling up, does not count Long-Standing Solitude, plus Stone Flux Pauldron, that combo. So once again, that combo with False Sun is even stronger somehow. Technically speaking, I'd rank this along with Seared Steak. It's kind of situational because Quick Fix requires other items to be good, Seared Steak requires nothing to be good. So it's kind of difficult to rank one over the other because Quick Fix is better if you have items, but if you don't have items, then Seared Steak is better. I don't know. I'm just gonna lump them together. Seared Steak, which is increases maximum health by 50 plus 50 per stack, plus an additional 5% plus 5% per stack of your max health. One of the rare percent-based max health increasing items in the game, with Radiant / Irradiant Pearls being the other. And yet another item that the False Sun absolutely drools over. Although other tanky survivors are gonna like this item as well. Drifter, for example, is incredibly thick. Next is Hearty Stew, increases regeneration by 2.5 plus 2.5 per second. At full HP, your regeneration is added to your base damage. And by full HP, this just means your regular green health. So if you have a shield, technically speaking, you're at full HP. Also, if you're rocking a Transcendence, I mean, you're full HP the entire time. This item, especially paired with Quick Fix, can give you an insane amount of damage increase because this is added to your base value. For example, Commando at level 25 has roughly 38.4 damage, base damage. At around this point, you're going to stop leveling up, therefore you're not going to be able to get base damage ever again, outside of something like Prayer Beads. With a single Cautious Slug and Hearty Stew, you're looking at an extra 5.5 base damage, which is incredibly strong considering the fact that things like Tri-Tip Dagger are based on your base damage. It can get really powerful really quick, especially if you pair it with something like, I don't know, Quick Fix, which increases your health regeneration bonuses by 50%. And I don't know if there's a legendary item like, for example, Rejuvenation Rack, which is heal 100% more, which also affects the player's base health regen. You start to do a lot more damage. I'd keep it in the A tier because it does require a lot of setup for it to be as strong as it needs to be. But if you do have the prerequisites, it is very strong. Now for our S tier, here are the two ridiculously strong meal items. The first one is Ultimate Meal. At full health, all random effects are rolled +2 per stack extra times for a better outcome. Once again, if you have a PSG, a Kinetic Dampener, Transcendence, or Plasma Shrimp, or any form of shield, that helps protect your green HP, which is technically your full health. An Ultimate Meal is essentially just 2 57-leaf clovers, as long as you're at that full health mark. If you know about the 57-leaf clover, you should know that this is one of the strongest items in the game, bar none. And the stacking on it is pretty insane as well. +2 per stack means that basically anytime you have a 57-leaf clover that you can combine into an Ultimate Meal, you should take this exchange. Definitely S tier, and might be one of the strongest items in the game, period. Now, for the penultimate, most impressive, most delicious, and also kind of the weirdest thing you could possibly put in your tummy, Sauteed Worms. On hit, 10% chance to summon a Spectral Worm that seeks out, damages, and ignites enemies for 500% plus 500% per stack, total damage per second for 10 seconds. It is created through the combination of a Charged Perforator with a Molten Perforator, and it cannot be understated that it is doing 500% total damage per second for 10 seconds. It is a spectral homing worm that will seek out enemies for you. It's also kind of cool to look at on your screen. A little smaller than I expected, but I've heard that my entire life, so I don't have any ground to stand on here. I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know if this thing has a proc coefficient because I don't think it needs it. I don't know if it can proc items itself. All I can really say is, good shit, Gearbox. This is amazing. You really know how to make my worm wiggle. And that's it. That's the tier list. Congratulations, everybody who made it this far. This is obviously my subjective opinion on a lot of the items, and I could be convinced otherwise. I'm very open-minded. My only question is, do you know about the Country Bears? Go check out the other guides and Twitch TV /RD Thursday if you want to watch. SwagMoney69 signing out.